Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The federal court has ruled that the Trudeau government's use of the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy in 2022 violated the Charter. We have reaction. We have a special interview with Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who's in Israel touring the devastated areas hit by Hamas terrorists last October. And we hear how invasive species cost the Alberta farmers and our economy over $2 billion annually.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Federal Court of Canada says the Trudeau government's use of the Emergencies Act in the early part of 2022 in Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy was unreasonable and violated the Charter. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland disagreed with the ruling and says that her government will be appealing.
The public safety of Canadians was under threat. Our national security, which includes our national economic security, was under threat. It was a hard decision to take. We took it very seriously after a lot of hard work, after a lot of careful deliberation. We were convinced at the time, I was convinced at the time, it was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing to do. I remain, and we remain, convinced of that.
Alberta lawyer Leighton Gray, who hosts Gray Matter here on Miracle Channel, says the federal government should have never invoked the Emergencies Act in the first place during the Freedom Convoy almost 2 years ago. He says Canadians' rights were violated and that was simply illegal.
This is a very important landmark decision for three reasons. Firstly, it dismissed the government's attempt to have this case not even heard on its merits. It dismissed the idea that the issue was moot. And said that there's important public interest here. And then secondly, it said, as the court did in Alberta in the Ingram case, it said that the federal government had exceeded its constitutional authority, the authority granted to it under the statute, under the Emergencies Act. And finally, perhaps most importantly, the court said that charter protections under Section 2B and Section 8 were violated by this government in a way that could not be upheld under the saving provision, Section 1 of the Charter, which until now, in cases of this kind, has been a cure-all for governments.
RCMP and Terrace, British Columbia have confirmed that 3 people were killed and 4 others were seriously injured in the crash of a heli-skiing helicopter. The crash took place late Monday, around 50 kilometers northwest of the city, as 3 helicopters were carrying skiers to the backcountry. The Transportation Safety Board, the BC Coroner Service, and WorkSafe BC are also investigating the crash. A 23-year-old man convicted of killing 4 members of a Muslim family in London, Ontario, was back in court for the continuation of a sentencing hearing on Tuesday. The court is expected to hear whether Nathaniel Veltman's attack amounted to an act of terrorism. Defense lawyers say Veltman faces a sentence of life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years on his first-degree murder convictions. The issue of a terrorism designation could become significant if and when Veltman applies for parole. It will also have an impact on future cases that may be similar in nature. 24 Israeli soldiers lost their lives during the deadliest day for their military since the war with Hamas began in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will not stop fighting until they achieve their total victory. On CBN's Centerpoint program, a spokesperson with the Israel Defense Forces says soldiers were planting explosives in a building to bring it down when Hamas fired an RPG at them. He explains where it took place.
The forces were operating in an area between the Israeli communities and Gaza near the community of Kisufim. The forces were removing structures and terrorist infrastructure in the area approximately 600 meters from the border. This war has a very painful and heavy price. The devoted reservists who rallied to the flag sacrificed everything for the security of Israel so that we all can live here securely.
A number of Canadian journalists have made their way to the site of the Hamas atrocities in southern Israel when around 1,200 innocent civilians were killed. Reporter Brian Lilly is in Tel Aviv, and he says he was at one of the kibbutzes, which was totally wiped out. He says even close to 3 months later, the smell of death and destruction still linger.
When I was on kibbutz Riem, where Ilan was, he said, long after your memories fade, after what you've seen has faded from your mind, the smell will stay. And so it's January 23rd. This was January 22nd. We're there. The attacks happened October 7th, and the smell of the burning buildings where the fighting happened, where people died, where people were burned alive, or the buildings were torched after Hamas killed people. That smell's lingering in the air, Hal.
Mr. Lilly will also discuss how the Canadian government may have actually contributed financially to Hamas. You'll have details coming up later in our broadcast. Russian missiles targeted Ukraine's 2 biggest cities on Tuesday, damaging apartment complexes and killing at least 7 people. This follows a message from Moscow that shunned any deal to end the almost 2-year war.
Чесно, дуже злякалася. Я так закричала. Я так ніколи не кричала, як сьогодні зранку. Десь в 7:30 це було. І це... Я кажу, мені кажуть, чого ти не була в підвалі, чого ти пішла оттудова? Я казала, та холодно і так далі. Я потім реально про це пожаліла, бо тепер у мене переляк.
Летела ракета, был свист. И я только успел пригнуться, только все. Я вышел как раз на улицу, там на улице стоял. И потом только хлопок, и все, и больше такого особо. И все, как бы там все нормально было, как бы, ну испугался, конечно, страшно было, очень страшно. Вот, я сразу сюда прибежал, увидел, что тут все разруха такая. Ну, конечно, страх есть, и есть он до сих пор, это страх. Трусимся, как бы, боимся, но переживем, все будет, слава Украине, все будет хорошо.
Well, the meltdown has begun here in our city. The roads are pretty sloppy and slushy right now, thanks to the above-zero temperatures. Jeanette Roche is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, it looks like we may be well above the freezing mark for the rest of the week.
Oh, not just above freezing, but actually looking into next week, I'm seeing some high teen temperatures. So I'm thinking Chinook. Okay, so we did reach a high of 5 degrees today, and those 50K winds that we had earlier today, they should be dying down this evening. And tomorrow as well, only a 20K wind tomorrow, high of 3 degrees, mainly sunny skies. And then after that, it's just going to get warmer and warmer and warmer. And I'll tell you just how warm when I'm back later in the show to give you the full look at weather.
Great, thanks so much, Jeanette. Edmonton police say a man has been arrested after shots were fired and a Molotov cocktail was thrown inside of City Hall in Edmonton. Police say they arrived on scene around 10:30 in the morning local time after a public committee meeting was interrupted by the gunshots. Fortunately, no one was injured and the area by the shooting was cordoned off. Officials say the Molotov cocktail was tossed from the 2nd floor onto the 1st floor in the building's main atrium. Late Tuesday afternoon, police in tactical gear could be seen at the scene. Roads around City Hall were closed. The mayor, city councillors, and staff were temporarily locked in a room. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh and his MPs are meeting in Edmonton over the next few days to plot their strategy for the return to Parliament. The federal New Democrats descended on our provincial capital for a 3-day caucus meeting with electoral growth and policy goals top of mind. Singh also says he keeps hearing how the high cost of living is impacting so many families.
People are worried about the cost of everything being more expensive. They're saying that the rent's up, the mortgage is up, everything's more expensive, groceries are more expensive. And they were feeling that worry that what's going to happen next, that uncertainty for the future. They weren't hopeful for a new year, they were worried. And they're worried for their kids, they're worried about putting food on the table. They felt a lot of worry and fear. And at a time when people are feeling this here in Edmonton, we know this is what people are feeling across the country. At the same time, Justin Trudeau is having a meeting with his cabinet in Montreal, and he's talking about growing the middle class. Well, he's had almost 9 years in power, and instead of growing the middle class, things have gotten worse and worse.
Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told reporters in Montreal during his party's 3-day retreat that he has an engagement strategy to bolster Canada-U.S. relations ahead of this November's presidential election. He says it starts with a couple of his ministers.
I have asked our Minister of Trade and our Minister of Industry, Mary Ng and François-Philippe Champagne, to lead the Team Canada approach, working with Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, who's here today for the panel, to pull together, as we did a number of years ago a Team Canada approach, including businesses, entrepreneurs, organized labor, civil society groups, different orders of government, to make sure that we're ready to continue to benefit as Canadians from a strong relationship with the United States.
Lethbridge NDP MLA and Alberta finance critic Shannon Phillips says Albertans do not want our province to pull out of the CPP to create its own pension plan. In Calgary on Tuesday, Phillips says there are many risks involved if the UCP does end up pulling Albertans out of the Canada Pension Plan.
That Albertans will have to have a new tax collection agency. It'll mean that we get to file our personal income tax twice, which doesn't sound like a lot of fun to a whole lot of people. And Finance Minister Travis Toews last year in budget estimates confirmed to me under questioning that an Alberta tax revenue agency would cost a minimum of $500 million a year. It would involve hiring between 2,000 and 3,000 more public servants as tax collectors. No wonder Travis Toews didn't run again in May. He knew what this fool's errand would cost. And even he probably knew we should use $500 million for healthcare, for education, for other services, not for this.
Premier Danielle Smith has said that more study needs to be done to see if it makes financial sense to pull out of the CPP. She also says a referendum would also be held to see if Albertans really want to move forward with the plan. A coroner's inquest has heard that the man who went on a stabbing rampage on a Saskatchewan First Nation in 2022 was not on the radar in the province's specialized enforcement team. A warrant had been issued by Saskatoon Police for Miles Sanderson, but officials said 52 other people were also unlawfully at large in the province on the day of the mass killing. More than 5,400 were on outstanding warrants. Police said the team's mandate is to go after the greatest threats to public safety. They said even though Sanderson had a long criminal record, he told the inquest that it is not uncommon people the team is looking for. The federal and Saskatchewan governments are providing $6.8 million to fund livestock and forage research. Ottawa says the money will support 30 new projects that aim to help the agriculture sector prepare for the future. Federal Agriculture Minister Lawrence MacAulay says the projects will help producers who battle drought, disease, and other environmental problems. Officials with the Saskatchewan government say the projects will help producers stay competitive in the global market. Alberta is often referred to as being rat-free, but most people don't see the invasive species hidden in plain sight. More than 100 invasive plants are calling Alberta home right now, along with additional fish and animals. Megan Evans with Alberta Invasive Species Council says the concern is not only on the environment, but also on the financial impact.
Invasive species are considered to be the second biggest threat to biodiversity in the world, and they cost the Alberta economy over $2 billion every single year. So these are things that are impacting every single Albertan, whether they know it or not. So invasive species can be things like pigs and rats and invasive plant species, goldfish, Prussian carp, crayfish, zebra mussels. There are all kinds of different types of invasive species, and we all have a role to play in preventing the introduction and spread.
Now, agriculture impact is the most concerning due to the array of different species in the province. Evans says native grasslands are one of the most endangered ecosystems in the world. She believes monitoring and dealing with the issue takes a team effort.
Invasive plants are one of the most abundant and diverse group of invasive species that we have. They're the ones that are costing us the most in economic damages right now, primarily to agriculture. And a lot of our agricultural fieldmen, the rural municipalities, are really involved in those programs as well, and there's a lot of boots on the ground.
Officials say if you're interested in the different species, you can head on over to abinvasives.ca, and if you see something, say something. The Lethbridge School Division is set to host this year's Alberta Esports Championship, May 3rd and 4th at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre. The gaming tournament is open to all students between the ages of 12 to 18 and will feature games such as Super Smash Brothers, Rocket League, Omega Strikers, and League of Legends. Director of Technology, Learning and Innovation with the division, Jesse Sidlowski, says the rising popularity of esports helps foster the social aspect of gaming.
I think the rise in esports is finally just coming to fruition. It's always been there. I think most of us growing up all had consoles in our home and video game consoles in our houses. And today's students and today's culture is, back when I was younger, maybe we had video arcades and so forth where we gathered together, but our youth today find themselves gathering online more and more. And we know there's some unhealthy behaviors with that. So our vision through the esports is rather than taking that cultures and maybe some of those negative aspects, of the students playing that at home is to bring the students together and try to teach them some of those skills that are required, those in-person skills that are required.
Now, partnering with the Lethbridge School Division on this event is the Ghana Board of Education. Garrett Tailfeathers, the IT coordinator for the district, says the students at Ghana High School are very excited to get on board.
We've been here since the beginning, and we are in the early stages of esports. We have just got our equipment in not too long ago, and we are in the process of setting all that gear up and getting our students involved. Most of the students at the school are very excited, and we have a coach, Brad Holt, who's out at Kainai High School. So, you know, we are in the early stages, but we're all very excited to be part of this event.
Now, throughout the tournament, an array of enjoyable, family-friendly, free play events will be accessible to all attendees. You know, the constant freezing and warming conditions we're experiencing here in Lethbridge is causing water lines to expand and contract, leading to water main breaks. Director of Infrastructure Services with the city, Joel Sanchez, says it's a coordinated approach to deal with damaged infrastructure and keep water flowing to residents.
Every time you have those expansion and contractions, things are going to happen. We work closely with the plants as well, because we have another way to kind of know if there is an issue depending on the regular water consumption. Every time the plants see that a higher number of consumption, that means that either somebody's using more water or water is leaking somewhere else. Part of the technology, again, is looking with ultrasound or sound detection to pinpoint where that leak is and then get to those points. So we definitely will see an increase in the next few weeks, regardless water main breaks. We could see some, and the staff is ready for that.
And as for the forecast, more warm temperatures are expected during the day, with below zero expected each and every night this week. You know, it's not every day you get to lace up your skates beside your hometown hockey heroes. But that's exactly what hundreds of 5th and 6th graders got to do today at the NMAC Center in Lethbridge. These are 350 AMA school safety patrols who volunteer their time to guide pedestrians, like their fellow schoolmates, safely across the crosswalks at their schools before and after class. As AMA's way of saying thank you and to celebrate 86 years of keeping Alberta's youth safe through the School Safety Patrol program, these young volunteers got to skate alongside the Lethbridge Hurricanes and members of the Lethbridge Police Service.
Our patrollers are out on the crosswalk, whether it's raining, snowing, the cold weather. They're out there ensuring pedestrians get to and from school safely every single day.
What made you want to be a patrol?
I don't know, it just seems really fun. I want to help people get across the road and be safe. I like the feeling of knowing that I helped someone.
How about those early mornings or standing outside in the rain or the snow?
It's cold.
So it's just nice to come out and have that positive interaction, and you know, we coach hockey, we're dads, and so they get to see another side of us as well. And this is my first time skating in uniform, so it's kind of neat too.
Is it a little bit different?
It's way different, and the balance is all off.
We've been skating, getting signatures and autographs. It's been really fun.
There you go. It's cool. There's a lot of kids, so a lot of signatures to get through.
According to AMA, in the 86 years of the program, there have been 0 fatalities or serious injuries when a patroller is on the crosswalk. That's great to see. You know, most of the snow we received last week is slowly disappearing. The mercury has been climbing, and the temperature will be warming up quite a bit later this week. Complete weather details are coming up. While we enjoy lots of sunshine and milder temperatures across much of southwestern Alberta on Tuesday, Jeanette Rocher is in now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we better load up on some of that windshield washer fluid since the meltdown should be on all week.
Oh, so true, Hal. I even used mine a couple of times this morning on the drive in. But yes, talk about a warm up. We are certainly in for it. Take in mind there that in the morning we're still going to be experiencing a bit of wind chill, feeling like -8 early in the morning, but up to 3 degrees for Wednesday, all the way up to 5 on Thursday and Friday, 7 degrees on Saturday. And look at that next week, as I was saying earlier, 16 for a high on Sunday, all the way up to 18 degrees on Monday. That is absolutely insane for this time of year. It's wonderful. Average high for this time of year, -2, -14 is the average low. 15 was our high temperature on this day. That happened back in 2005. And the coldest was recorded in 1969 and it was minus 43. Sun rose this morning at 8:16. Sun set this evening at 5:12. We are now getting so close to that 9-hour mark. We're sitting at 8 hours and 56 minutes of daylight. Loving it. Okay, so on the west coast tomorrow, Victoria sitting at a high of 9 degrees, seeing periods of rain, 30 to 50K winds. 8 degrees for a high tomorrow in Vancouver, 10 to 15 millimeters of rain. Sunshine in Edmonton, seeing some fog in the morning that's going to be dissipating around noon, minus 2 for a high, 4 degrees for a high in Calgary, also looking at sunshine there. Now in Saskatoon, we are seeing a risk of some freezing drizzle, a high of minus 8 degrees. That should clear up later on in the day. Minus 5 for a high in Regina, minus 1 in Winnipeg, seeing periods of light snow. Now in Toronto, seeing periods of snow changing to drizzle, and then possibly seeing a risk of freezing drizzle as well. High of 4 degrees there, minus 2 for a high in Ottawa, seeing a 30% chance of flurries, 40% chance of snow in Montreal tomorrow, minus 2 for a high as we get into Atlantic Canada, seeing mainly clear skies across the Maritimes there, minus 5 for a high in Fredericton. Same thing for Halifax, minus 7 for a high in Charlottetown, mix of sun and cloud, and up to 60K winds in St. John's, sitting at a high of minus 9 and mainly sunny skies. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Lower income Canadian households are being hurt the most by high interest rates. Now that's according to Stats Canada, which found the disposable income gap between the top 40% of earners and the bottom 40% climbed a half a percentage point in the third quarter of last year compared to 2022. The agency says high interest rates are fueling the growing gap. According to Stats Canada, higher loan payments have taken a bit out of disposable income for the lowest earners, leaving them with little money to invest in time of high yields. France's privacy watchdog has fined Amazon's French warehouse business $35 million for using an excessively intrusive system. Officials say it was to monitor worker performance and activity. The regulator says the system allowed managers at Amazon France to track employees so closely that it resulted in multiple breaches of the European Union's stringent privacy rules. The watchdog's investigation focused on employees' use of handheld barcode scanners to track packages, saying it allows the company to monitor employees to the nearest second. Amazon says it may file an appeal, saying the system is used to track packages and ensure the safety of warehouse operations. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 110 points on the day to finish at 21,034. The Dow was down 96 points to 37,905. The S&P 500 was up 14 on the day to 4864, and the Nasdaq was up 65 points to 15,425. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 39 cents to 74.37 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 3 cents to 2.45 US. Gold was up 80 cents on the day to $2,030.08 US an ounce, and silver was up 35 cents to $22.44 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.84 per bushel, barley's at $6.42, canola's at $14.49, and corn is at $7.60 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was up 88 cents to $174.65. Feeder cattle were up $1.18 to $2.31, and lean hogs were up $2.38 to $73.30. That again is for the February contract. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.28 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Federal Court of Canada says the Trudeau government's use of the Emergencies Act in the early part of 2022 in Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy was unreasonable and violated the Charter. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland disagreed with the ruling and says that her government will be appealing. Coming up, we have a very special report from reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly from Tel Aviv, Israel. Brian will explain what he saw when he went on a tour of southern Israel, where so many people lost their lives following the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of our local stories, visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca. October 7th of last year is a day that we will never forget. It's a day when more than 1,200 innocent people lost their lives in southern Israel following attacks by the terrorist group Hamas. Hamas also kidnapped around 250 people. Brian Lilly is a reporter, columnist for the Toronto Sun, and a regular on our news program right here at Bridge City News. And he joins us now for a special Q&A from Tel Aviv, Israel. Brian, welcome back to our program. And what's the purpose of your trip there?
Just coming here with colleagues from Post Media. I'm here with my editor-in-chief, Adrian Batra, some colleagues from National Post, Rob Roberts, who's the editor-in-chief of the National Post, Terry Glavin, columnist with the National Post, and trip. We're not with a lobby group, but trip put together with the help of some Jewish Canadians who are concerned and wanted us to talk to people, and they've put together it's a very interesting itinerary because we're not talking to people from just one side. We are talking to people in the IDF, from lowest ranks to the highest ranks, talking to people across the political spectrum in Israel, talking to family members of hostages, touring, as we'll talk about in a moment, some of the communities that were attacked on October 7th, talking to tomorrow it'll be with a man who is a Druze Israeli, which is a smaller religious sect. Some would affiliate it with Islam, some do not, but it's in that vein, whose family is very much involved in defending the state of Israel. We're talking to groups that try and work together for peace and trying to learn on the ground how people are feeling, what it was like, and see the barbarity of the attacks, quite frankly, firsthand, which is what we were doing yesterday.
Now, you wrote about going to see some of the kibbutz communities that were attacked on October the 7th, Brian, including one where you interviewed a man vital in fighting off the Hamas terrorists.
Yeah, and this is a man that I interviewed, and I believe we may have talked about it back in November, a man named Ilan Cohen. He and one of his fellow community members did a tour of Toronto. And I remember sitting in a cafe there, talking to them about it, looking at their photos, asking them questions, seeing the video of how the Hamas fighters, the terrorists, got into their gated kibbutz community. And then here I am 3 months later on the ground with him, looking at what he had told me. And, you can look at the videos, you can look at the photos, you can hear the stories. It's not the same as being there. It's not the same as walking the ground where these things happen. In something that will stick with me forever. And I had realized this in a visit to a previous kibbutz, but when I was on kibbutz Riem, where Ilan was, he said, long after your memories fade, after what you've seen has faded from your mind, the smell will stay. And so it's January 23rd. This was January 22nd. We're there. The attacks happened October 7th, and the smell of the burning buildings where the fighting happened, where people died, where people were burned alive, or the buildings were torched after Hamas killed people. That smell's lingering in the air, Hal. It was incredible. Incredibly sobering, depressing, moving, all at once. But we visited Kibbutz Riem, we visited Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which the woman who was guiding us had been away on vacation when the attacks happened, and from my understanding of talking to her, all of her different family members who were still there survived, but her home's right in the middle of the kibbutz, right next to the armory. The Israeli government had said years ago, all the kibbutzes have, in-community defense forces, and they said you've got to have an armory and store your weapons there. Well, that's right next to her house, and the terrorists landed there. You can see Gaza. You can see where they came in from this community, and they came in by paragliders, and they landed on her house, and they took up positions there so that they could ambush anyone that came in. And you just walk around and you see the destruction and you see where people died, and it is a very different experience.
Yeah, very surreal, I can imagine. Brian, these kibbutz communities are communal in nature, they're agricultural, but many have been completely destroyed. You've chatted with a lot of the people there right now. Are they wanting to rebuild?
Some are and some aren't. And there's a woman staying in my hotel. The hotels here in Tel Aviv are filled with displaced people from the kibbutz settlements in the south, displaced people from the cities in the north, because there's a threat of Hezbollah attacking at any moment. And they have attacked. They've launched rockets and they have done that, but there are worries of a full-scale attack. And so I've, surrounded by people who come from all different parts of Israel and are staying here. One of the women from Kibbutz Kfar Aza that I was just telling you about, she was away visiting her parents in the United States when the attacks happened, and she has not been back since. She has not been back. She told me she's got survivor's guilt. She tells me that she said, just this morning, I text my social worker, I need to see a therapist now, not next week. I need that now. She has trouble sleeping. She now takes sleeping pills because of the survivor's guilt. And how many of her friends, and I had seen the memorials to these friends who had died just the day before, she's not sure if she wants to go back. The woman that gave us the tour said, she is in the middle of cleaning her house for the first time. She's been staying somewhere else. She started cleaning her house to clean away the remnants of the terrorists that were set up camp in her house for a while until they were chased out. Some want to go back right away. Others are not sure. Some do not want to go back at all. And then if you do go back, what do you do with some of these buildings that cannot be repaired, where people died and as I say, things torched? Do you make it into a memorial? Do you bulldoze it and rebuild? These are the debates, the discussions that people are having, and right now there's no clear answer.
Now, one of the places you went to visit was the site of the Nova Dance Festival, where more than 350 young people were killed and many were taken hostage. Brian, what was that like?
It is this big national park, and I was thinking back to my youth and going to music festivals at places like that. We used to pile in a car, all of our friends, and head off to Molson Park in Barrie. Go to different concert festivals like that, and just the joy, the exhilaration on Canada Day or some other long weekend. That's what these kids were doing, and now you've got these memorials set up there. Just the day before we got there, the IDF had joined with family members in planting a tree for each of the 364 that we know of now that are dead. And I say that we know of now because it's a growing count as they identify more remains, as they find more remains. I walked through the little grove of trees that people ran to try and get away. You could see the farmers' fields that they ran to, and many ran and fled to this kibbutz Riem that I mentioned, where I talked to the guy that helped fight them back. Many people found shelter there, but some of them were killed in that site, despite finding the shelter, because that was the kibbutz closest to the music festival. And then, we'll talk about the hostages more in a moment, but I got these dog tags today while visiting a place with where a lot of hostages' families go. And it's, these are dog tags that say, both in Hebrew and English, bring them home now. That's where so many of the hostages were taken. Yes, the hostages were taken in other communities, but remember, many were just taken from there. In the brutality of what happened on that day can't be understated.
Brian, you've been interviewing a number of members with the Israel Defense Forces. What's the morale like right now with the IDF? I mean, many people feel like this army really failed them, let people down on October the 7th. Yeah,
the IDF is normally one of the most trusted institutions in Israel. And that's from years of polling. They, very low, like many democracies, very low opinion of politicians. But the IDF was seen as being above the fray and, an organization that could be trusted. Whether I'm talking to civilians or talking to IDF members, everyone says the trust was broken on October 7th. very interesting discussion over lunch today with Jonathan Cornicus, who is a man many of your viewers would recognize. They would have seen clips of him on social media. They would have seen him on major broadcasters around the world. He was one of the English spokespeople for the IDF until very recently. And he just said, we thought we were doing what we needed to do, but we were disoriented. And he's talking to a couple of us who had served as Canadian reservists. An awful lot of people who in the IDF are reservists as well. And he said, well, when you're out in the field and you think you're looking at one thing, but you're looking at something else because you're disoriented and your map and your terrain surroundings are off. He said that's what we were like as a country. And we didn't have the right focus. So everyone is admitting that they messed up. But right now, the focus is defeating Hamas. And if they can, and that is a big if, getting the hostages home. Everyone wants the hostages home. I think there is a major question that people don't want to talk about here, and that is, can they be brought home? Are many of them now dead? Are things like that? Or is Hamas just going to? Will Hamas allow them to go? I think that's a major question, and that's kind of one of the things that I'm sensing is that it's under the surface, but people do not want to talk about that.
Brian, you recently met with a former member of Israel's parliament who spent time looking into an organization Canada funds that many Israelis believe supports terror. Do you believe that Canada may have unknowingly contributed financially to the October 7th attacks?
Worse than that, Hal, I think that Canada knowingly contributed to Hamas and the October 7th attacks. Not thinking that they were doing it directly, but the organization that we're talking about is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East. That is the full name of the place. It's called UNRWA. In 2010, the Harper government withdrew funding from UNRWA because of their close ties with Hamas. The hatred, the anti-Semitic hatred being taught in schools, the close alliance between Hamas and hospitals and schools run by UNRWA, the number of employees of UNRWA, be it teachers or doctors or nurses who were also Hamas members, was too much for the Harper government to ignore. So from 2010 till 2016, they did not get Canadian funding. They were, if for a long time had been seen as, well, it's the United Nations, we'll give them money, it's how we'll help Palestinian refugees. And then there was too much evidence. Harper took that money away. Trudeau gave it back in 2016. And we have been an organization, a country that over the last several years has given $25 million US, meaning even more Canadian. We committed $103 million over 4 years just last June. And in December, as questions were being asked by independent Liberal MP out of Toronto, Kevin Vuong, who has been stellar in holding the Liberal government to account over the last several months, he asked about, why are we still giving money to this organization? And a Trudeau cabinet minister stood up and said, there's a humanitarian crisis. We should be giving them more, not less. By the time he was answering that question, everyone knew that the Shifa Hospital, run by UNRWA, all the organizations run by UNRWA, they had tunnels under them. Weapons were being hidden. Hostages were being hidden there. There is no difference between UNRWA and Hamas as far as many Israelis are concerned. And quite frankly, I've known of the connection for a long time. I've seen more evidence now. So we have been funding an organization, who knows how much of our aid money, hundreds of millions over the last several years, has been diverted to building the tunnels, buying the materials for the rockets.
Brian, you recently posted a video on X, formerly known as Twitter, about going to a place that was the cultural center of Tel Aviv, but is now known simply as Hostage Square. Let's talk about that experience. Now, you chatted with some family members of the hostages.
Yeah, and that's where I got these dog tags that I've been wearing for most of the day. I took off because they would reflect too much on the screen and be shining back at you. It was something else. So to give you a sense of where this is, it's there's a lot of government buildings near there. It's the square where the Tel Aviv Museum of Art is. The Opera House is there. There's a theater there. And then there's this big open square, all these cultural buildings around where you normally gather for joyous occasions. You're going to a play, you're going to a show, you're going to an opera. And there are live music performances in the square normally. Fun ones. They still have live music performances now, but it's artists coming and giving of their time in rallies for the hostages and bringing them home. So this place has gone from a center of joy and artistic expression. Now it's filled with tents. There is a simulation of the terror tunnels that the hostages are held in that you can walk through. That is a tough experience. One woman walked back out. She walked in ahead of me and a few feet in just walked back out shaking because she said, I can't do it. And you can meet family members there. There was one young man, 26 years old, telling the story of his 24-year-old cousin and how they'd grown up together and how close they were. And then how he, became very involved with the music scene and wanted to be a music producer and convinced all his friends to go to the Nova Music Festival. And that's where he was taken hostage. Father of another young man also taken hostage there. In just hearing their stories and how one of the most heartbreaking things that I've heard, and we know the concerns that have been raised about sexual abuse and violence against women, both on October 7th and since, was hearing the story of an Israeli mother who said of her young daughter and the other young women that have been kidnapped, we have to bring them home soon before it's too late for an abortion. And I can't imagine thinking that. Like you, I'm pro-life, but you're thinking about what has happened to your daughter, and just that someone would have to go through that experience and arrive at that conclusion because of what the terrorists have done. That was one of the most heartbreaking moments that I heard.
Reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thank you so much for this very special report and joining us today from Tel Aviv, Israel.
Thank you.
The University of Lethbridge continues to train the next generation of thinkers, teachers, and builders. One area of study that may boggle the mind but also advances thought and theory in our modern world is the study of quantum physics. Joining us today to discuss the ideas and the science behind this field of study is Professor Surya Das. Professor Das, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much, Devin. Thanks for having me.
So, Professor, can you explain the fundamental principles of quantum physics in simple terms for our viewers who may not be familiar with the subject? And maybe just go into what the word quantum means, because I've heard quantum physics, quantum mechanics, quantum computing. What does all this mean? Put this into the layman's terms for us here.
Of course, I'll try my best. So, at the fundamental or the subatomic or the very tiny levels, the nature and physics works a bit differently than we see around us, which is very smooth and deterministic. At the subatomic level, nature is more probabilistic and uncertain, but that's the fundamental law of nature. Therefore, it affects everything that we see around us, like computers and what have you, like our cell phones, GPS, everything is determined by quantum mechanics. But although since it operates at a very small scale, we can't really see it with our naked eyes. So that's the fundamental nature. And quantum, the word quantum means it's related to the word quantity, because at the fundamental level, things aren't that smooth. It's always in terms of quantums, like packets of energy, packets of momentum, packets of charge, and that kind of thing. So that's the origin of the word quantum, and being ubiquitous, it's kind of applied everywhere as it should be.
Okay, so now that we know the word quantum, can you just tell us what the purpose of studying quantum physics and quantum theories is all about?
Because, at least two ways of looking at it. One is to answer the fundamental questions of nature, which as human beings, we have always been curious about. for thousands and thousands of years. Like, for example, where did we come from? Where are we going? What's the universe made up of? What are its constituents? And how does basically everything work? Why do we have 3 space and 4 dimensions? Why not something else? Why do you have 1 time and not 2? So these are fundamental questions that often we take for granted. But so to answer these questions, we have to invoke quantum physics, because that's the fundamental thing. So if we want to ask fundamental questions, we have to go to the fundamental theories of nature or fundamental ideas. That's one way of looking at it. Other ways, like, although these questions are fundamental, they have always been applicable and applied to technology. And modern technology, like computers, electronics, they cannot do without quantum mechanics.
Okay.
Therefore, that's the other motivation, that fundamental physics advances may not the advantages may not be obvious now today, but very shortly thereafter, usually they become applicable to technology. Most of them anyway.
And then, how does the study of quantum sciences advance the mission of the University of Lethbridge then?
Well, University of Lethbridge is first of all a university, which means that the pursuit of knowledge, pure knowledge, just for the sake of pursuing, that's one of the tasks of the university, right? To push the frontiers of human knowledge, so to speak. So that is a very strong motivation. Also, being fundamental questions that are being or would be answered, it's going to have impact in the training of our students, the potential of our students of being useful in science, in society, everywhere, because this is like very good training. It would attract the best minds, very first-rate minds to this university to enhance the research reputation that it already has. But it will certainly add to that. And as we have more people, first-rate, very good scientists and everything, they will attract more students and researchers. So it's kind of a growing kind of thing. So it's going to definitely continue to enhance the university's reputation, and it's in line with the university's plan and everything.
So let's talk about quantum entanglement, because it's often been described as a spooky action at a distance. Can you explain this phenomenon and its significance in the field of quantum physics?
Yeah, so quantum entanglement, that's a great question. So entanglement is one way of thinking why quantum mechanics is so powerful and is going to affect computers, for example. It's going to make computers like billion, trillion, zillion times faster. It already is, right? And the reason is that, of course, it's more powerful than classical computers. And the power, one way of thinking of it is that the power comes from entanglement, which basically says that all the atoms or whatever the fundamental entities are, they're all linked to each other. It's very difficult to extricate one from the other. And one way of saying is like when you put things together, the sum is bigger than its parts. So entangle means, right, like since the atoms and everything can now talk to each other, they can share resources. So they can share resources, like you have it's like, instead of, 5 people working in 5 different, locations, they join forces, and then it becomes much bigger than the whole. So entanglement is one way of thinking of it, and it's very quantum, therefore, and there you go. It kind of says why quantum mechanics is powerful.
So is this how we can get faster processors? We can get larger memory cards or like bigger chips of RAM in our computers?
Yeah, one can think of it that way in terms of the final, computing power. Quantum computers would work in a little bit different way. So thinking of in terms of, regular chips and RAM, we have to extend our kind of way of thinking or understanding that a little bit because it'll have other components, quantum components, right? Like newer quantum components. But in the end, yes, it will be immensely powerful. So it can do computations, calculations at speeds which are kind of almost unthinkable with classical computers.
Wow. Now, what are the current advancements or breakthroughs in the field of quantum physics that have the potential to revolutionize technology or our understanding of the universe?
Of course. So quantum mechanics, as I said, it's fundamental. It works everywhere. As I mentioned, it works at the subatomic scales. It works at the fundamental universe scales as well when we look at cosmology with telescopes at very large distances, cosmic distance scales. So the advances, there has been lots of advances in the last 20 or 30 years. That's why it's often said now we're we're going through a second quantum revolution. The first quantum revolution was when quantum mechanics was first proposed and formulated. And the revolution includes things like lots of new results in quantum computation. Now, quantum computations are closer than ever to being actually realized. There are already operational quantum computers here and there, not scaled to the extent that we would like to, but proof of principle, they've shown that it works, right? So breakthroughs in theoretical side, like the way we can use quantum computers, breakthroughs in the actual practical side of making of quantum computers. And thirdly, when we apply quantum mechanics to the whole universe, there are lots of new results, interesting things, observations which have come in the last couple of decades. So there has been a lot of advances, and that's the reason why this is kind of the right time.
Now, quantum physics challenges our classical understanding of cause and effect. How does the concept of probabilistic behavior at the quantum level relate to determinism and the nature of reality?
Again, that's a very good question. So the complete predictability that we see around us, for example, if I drop something, it's predicted that it falls, right? It doesn't, right? Or if I hit against the wall, I'll come back this side. So these are in a way of saying these are approximate things that we see. This is a kind of approximate a consequence of quantum mechanics. But if you go down to the fundamental, again, the atomic level, these things often don't work. In the sense, like if there's a wall there and there's an electron kind of hitting the wall over and over again, there's a 1 in a million chance it'll actually appear just on the other side. Like it'll just pass through the wall. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that's what happens. What happens is when you look at big systems like us or this room, these spooky effects, these non-intuitive effects, kind of become smaller and smaller and smaller. There's still a little bit of chance, but that I might go on the other side, but the chance is really small. So in a way of saying is what we see around us is an approximate view of nature. The exact view is the quantum view, and that's why we call this intuition, I guess, what we see around us.
So you're talking about nature here. Can you give us a description of the 4 forces of nature and how they interact in the realm of quantum physics?
Yes, absolutely. So there are, interestingly, we see, we can say there are lots of forces in nature. We see, a force when we pull something or we push something, but fundamentally there are just 4 forces in nature: the gravitational force, the electromagnetic force like magnets and stuff and charges, and the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force, which hold atoms together, which binds atoms together and things like that. So they're just 4. And fundamentally, since everything has to be quantum, these forces must be described by quantum mechanics. One of the problems is that gravitational force has kind of stood aside. It has kind of stubbornly resisted a quantum description of nature. That's one of the things which physicists are working on. But the goal, the holy grail of theoretical physics, if you like, is to try to find a theory, just one theory which explains all the 4 forces of nature. It has not been done so far. So we are kind of stuck at 3 on one side and 1 on the other side. But that's the hope, hopefully.
So we're talking about numbers right here. Nikola Tesla talked a lot about the numbers 3, 6, and 9 in his work and research. Are there significant number sets in quantum physics?
Well, there's a reason, for example, why we have certain things. It has to do with symmetries, the underlying symmetries of nature. So there's some explanation of the numbers, not all. I'm not sure if Tesla's 3, 6, and 9 are directly related to what we have here. But, often there are underlying, we say symmetries or underlying views of nature which predict certain numbers. That's often the case. And that's one of the goals of physics as well, to see why certain numbers are the way they are. Sure.
Okay, so can you just give us a brief understanding of the difference between the computers we are used to and quantum computing?
We know of parallel processors, right? So my computer here probably has 1 processor, but you can have 8, and then 8 of them, work in tandem. They work together. Supercomputers may have, 50 maybe. But you can think of as a quantum computer as like having 1 million processors, or maybe 10 million or 1 billion. Of course, physically, you can't have 1 million processors, right? I mean, million is too many. It will probably occupy this whole city, and then you have power, and it's heating up and all that. It's not practical, right? But quantum mechanics because of entanglement, because it connects every piece with every piece else, it kinds of like that effectively you can think of the number of processors as growing exponentially, like, really, really. So even within a small, like quantum computer, it can be this big or whatever, like within a reason. But effectively, it could behave as something which has 1 million processors. And if you have 1 million processors effectively, although we don't actually have 1 million pieces inside, it's quantum mechanics, the miracle of that, you can accomplish a lot of things. For example, factorize large numbers or like in a fraction of a time. Some of the things that classical computers can't do are useful, for example, in e-commerce, like credit card numbers can go from one place to another without being, eavesdropped, because you can't do certain things. It'll take infinite amount of time. But with quantum computers, you can do it just like that. So there could be issues, challenges associated with it as well, like security and that kind of thing.
So you've touched on this throughout our interview, but can you just explain or summarize how the quality of life here on Earth will be better improved through the study and implementation of quantum mechanics and physics?
Yeah, well, it's in the end, there is this huge amount of resource that's out there, quantum resource. So it's kind of a resource that's not been tapped, broadly speaking. So anyway, we can tap this, not just a small resource, this huge amount of resource for computation and other stuff. Any amount of resource that can be used, fairly equitably, and that sort of thing for human, development or growth or happiness is a good thing. I think it's just like another very new kind of resource. It's like another source of energy, if you like, which has never been tapped. So, and it's, as far as I can see, the source is practically infinite. So that's ought to have an effect on, if used properly, of course, on human, betterment, I would say.
Well, Professor Das, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a good one. Bye.
That was Professor Surya Das from the University of Lethbridge. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.